Hello everyone, welcome to UGC NET Political Science classes by Drishti IAS. I am Dr. Ashwati. So students, in the last few classes we discussed about the theories of international relations. In this class we will be studying about the political theory. Okay. So students, political theory is part of the first unit of our syllabus, UGC NET syllabus, and you must have seen that there are actually two parts of it. One deals with the concepts and second one deals with the traditions. But in this lecture, I'll be giving a general introduction about political theory. Okay, so political theory and introduction. So political theory provides us with the ideas, concepts and theories for the purpose of analysis, description and explanation and criticism. As you know that every day we hear about various political events. So let's take an example like the Russia-Ukraine war also, or we can call it like that, the Russia's military action on Ukraine or Russia's invasion on Ukraine. Okay. So in this respect, we have to first understand that what are the key ideas, how can we apply theory to that aspect of that particular political event. Okay. So we have to go back to the history, then after we have to understand the behaviors of the both countries, like in terms of their state policy, their external policy as well as their domestic order as well. Okay. So in turn, like political theory, they are actually incorporated in the political science as well. Now, political philosophy is part of the normative political theory, like those areas which are like, let's talk it like in the sense of what ought to be. Okay, normative questions, they are like criticized for being speculative as well. Okay, so they are basically philosophical. You have to understand this. Okay, so according to Andrew Heywood, very important political thinker, as you know that Andrew Heywood has written so many books for political science related to, like, there are so many books related to political science written by Andrew Heywood, like, on political ideologies and introduction to political theory. In many areas he has covered so far, and also there is one good book for international relations as well. The title is Global Politics. Okay, so according to Andrew Heywood, political science was a child of the 20th century. It drew upon roots which dated back to the empiricism of the 17th century. Okay, so here he is actually linking like 17th century with that of the 20th century. So you can understand it like, how the ideas which were developed in the 17th century came to reflect upon the political ideas of the 20th century, its impact and everything. So as you know that even in international relations also we have studied about how Immanuel Kant's ideas actually how it influenced the idealists as well. Okay, then we can also understand it from the other perspective that how historically speaking, like the realists, they were highly influenced by the ancient thinkers as well as by the medieval thinkers. Okay, so now application of science in the realm of politics refers to the knowledge acquired through observation, experimentation and measurement. So we have to understand that there are actually two perspectives. One is normative, then second one is empirical. Okay, this is based on like science. This is philosophical. Okay, so here political science is empirical. Behavioralism, which is part of it, attained prominence in the 1950s and 60s, also called as the science of politics. So the political analysis based on empiricism, it became more popular in United States of America. Okay, and we can say that in the post Second World War period, behavioralism actually reached its zenith. Okay, now here we will first start with the normative tradition within the political theory. So first of all, we have to start with the Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. Okay, So these two thinkers, if you just, go back to your syllabus and everything, like, whatever you have studied in your bachelor's and master's, like Plato, ideal state, think about the philosopher king, the ideas of virtue. Then Aristotle also, he was also in search of the best government. Okay. So he actually made a, like, the comparison between different constitutions in the world. More than 150 constitutions were compared by Aristotle also. So in that he actually created, like, that one rule, that ruled by one, ruled by few and ruled by many. All these things were there. So both of them were actually looking for an ideal state, or we can say that how the state can actually, and the relationship with that of the citizens. Also they elaborated about the idea of slavery, property, justice and everything. Okay. But yes, we can place them in normative tradition because of the fact that they were more actually inclined towards the ideas of good life and many things. Okay. Now, Plato's conception of ideal society, then after the theory of forms, like, only those virtuous can actually, like, identify the real truth, and all these things are part of then his allegory of caves, if you remember. Okay, these all things, like the Plato, how he actually tried to showcase that, the myth of metals. Then after his theory on, like, there are three types of classes. First is the guardian class, then comes the auxiliary class, then comes the class or of the producers. Okay. So for the guardian class, he regarded that they are supposed to be philosopher kings. So you have to train a whole set of guardians out there. So the most, like, the most intelligent, or the person with a high intellect, or the person with high virtue will become the philosopher king. Then after comes the auxiliary class, mean to be engaged in, like, wars and all that, that their spirit is highly courageous one, right? So for the guardian class, he regarded that how to run the family. So they are not supposed to have family. So communal, like, that wives and property to be a kind of a, that to be what we say shared, and their idea that communism of wife and property was also propagated by Plato. And in that there will be a festival. Okay, that I'm not going into the details, because when I'll be teaching about the in this Western political thought, at that time I'll be elaborating more about the Plato's like theory about the guardian class. Okay, so now you can understand it here that it represents the philosophical dimension of politics. They are actually giving us with the ideas like what ought to be, what is good, what is a good conduct, what is justice. Okay, so how to conduct how the education should be. If you remember the ideas of education propagated by Plato also, like from this year to this year you have to study like this, that, and the education goes up to the age of 50. So now you can understand it from here that they are actually giving us the philosophical position. Okay. Now Aristotle's conception on moral action in Nicomachean ethics, so it also represents what we call it as the normative tradition. Then after Machiavelli's virtue and fortuna, his idea of fortuna, which he says that the king, how the king should be, in his book called The Prince, where he tells us the way that how the king needs to be changeling, flexible, and he needs to change his behavior in accordance with the context. Let's take an example, like he actually has given us the examples like, the king has to be courageous like a lion and cunning like a fox. Okay. And in discourses also, although he actually may, like, according to him, prince is there only for the transition period. He, end of the day, he is actually favoring a republic, right? So again, this idea also has a normative, like I have a, it also reflects the normative tradition. Now, J.S. Mill on liberty claimed that freedom of choice as essential element for the moral developments of individuals. Now, you can, from here, you can actually understand that he actually gives a kind of a privilege to freedom, to the extent that he is saying that the freedom of choice as an essential element for what? For moral development of individuals. Okay. So now we can say that in the antiquity period of Greek philosophers, They were searching for the ideal state and what is the best practices that can actually bring justice in the society. But with reference to the let's say the Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, these thinkers were more associated with the possessive individualism. Then we have J.S. Mill, his very idea of representative government, as well as his idea about other regarding action and self-regarding actions also. He is trying to give us a kind of an idea that it is highly philosophical. Okay, it is giving some normative values, how to improve the society and the state. Okay. Now, according to Leo Strauss, okay, and Leo Strauss, who has favored the normative tradition, he has come up with all these points. Okay. So, Machiavelli is regarded as the founder of the modern philosophy. Rousseau searched for moral standards in the values of history. If you remember the ideas of noble savage, his idea of noble savage, what he is trying to tell us is that the people, when they were in state of nature, there was they enjoyed freedom and many other things, but when there was a development of iron and corn, and it led to people actually, they started forming the society, and it actually created much tensions later. Okay, then he discussed about the inequalities also. These are the master slave, then after that governed and the governing class, and all these, that he actually tried to create a kind of what sort of inequalities are there in the society and the state. Okay, so he actually in a way he actually glorified the noble savage. And in the same way, if you remember, when you have studied in your bachelor's and master's, because I'm saying when you remember, it means that you must have studied about all these things in your bachelor's and master's. Okay, as well as those who are actually doing their research in the realm of political philosophy, so they must be having this idea about the noble savage theory. Okay, so now you can actually understand that from here, that he is actually saying that it was like the human beings were more happy as a noble savage, and then after he glorified the people in the state of nature. Although Thomas Hobbes against to that, the person who came first, the Thomas Hobbes, to him state of nature was in a very he picturized it in a very dark way, that is the people in state of nature are nasty, brutish and short. Okay, but for Rousseau, people were in a kind of a blissful situation. So these are all what we call it as, it all reflects that normativism. Okay. Then after the German idealism and the historicism, as we know that the Hegelian philosophy also, that how he actually constructed his theory and how he called that state as march of God on earth. Okay. So then after, the tradition of natural law runs throughout in this normative tradition. Okay, so we have this natural law, natural rights, and then after even Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, they all spoke about the natural rights. Okay. Now, when we are talking about the philosophical tenets that actually came later also, how it actually impacted. So the very first one that we have here is the Aristotelianism. Okay. So that Aristotle's ideas which are actually getting revived again and again. So in the modern times, Alasdair MacIntyre, he is a notable thinker and philosopher who actually revived the Aristotle's view in the modern period. And his famous book called The After Virtue is actually the work where you can actually find the revival of Aristotelian ideas. The system of natural law, you can actually find it there. Then after, we have this Platonism, his theory based on the theory of forms also, in order to realize the beauty of something, you need that, that virtue or that philosophical intellect, then only you can actually really realize that what is the beauty behind it. Okay. Now for me, it is like a pen, but it is a digital pen or something. So you need to understand, you need that knowledge. Okay, so they are actually talking more in terms of developing that knowledge out of you. Okay. So then after, you have this medieval Christianity, that is also one of the philosophical tenet of the normative tradition. So we can say that there was during this period of medieval period, there was a church and state debate was also there. Then after we have many thinkers like the Saint Augustine, then Saint Thomas Aquinas and Marcellus of Padua, and all these thinkers are there who have contributed towards this normative tradition. And in those days, state as an authorized by the God, the state was seen as a authorized by the God. So strict obedience towards the the laws of the state was felt necessary. And then there was a kind of what we say the significance of the New Testament was there. Then the moral philosophy was actually derived from two main sources. So obviously the Christian text, as the text of the Christianity, as well as the classical ethics. And in those days the society was actually constructed around feudalism, and then after the code of conduct was the most important element during the medieval times. Okay, so now empirical tradition. Okay, so empirical tradition is something bringing science to the realm of politics. Okay, so we have this name here, Auguste Comte. So he is regarded as the father of positivism. Now, influenced by the natural sciences as the reliable method of exploring the truth. So, emphasis was on the natural science. Okay, so let's say that, okay, you have a photosynthesis out there, you need sun rays, you need water, which actually through which plants produce that food for them, or the energy for their sustenance. So, similar to that, so this is just only a minuscule, or like I could say that just what we say, the atom of the whole universe. Okay, so here you can understand that how you can actually take the methodology of the natural science and can be applied to that of the for understanding the political phenomenon or anything associated with politics. Okay, now scientific tradition, significance of the Vienna Circle, as well as the rejection of the metaphysics. So, those things which you can actually see through your eyes, which you can actually verify it, which you can observe and produce like knowledge through experimentation, was considered as the relevant information or the relevant knowledge. Okay, or the acceptable knowledge. So, empiricism, observation and experience as sources of knowledge. So, it is not speculation, it was against speculation. Okay, against speculation, against wishful thinking. Okay, now here the principle of verification was there. Then the factual and statistical inquiries were necessary, without which you cannot actually reach up for the exploration of that truth or knowledge. Okay, so now we have to understand that the empirical tradition actually got a boost with that of the behavioral revolution that became prominent in the 1950s period in the post-Second World War scenario. In the post-Second World War period. Okay, so obviously during the two world wars we have seen the rise of totalitarianism, Nazism and fascism, and the world saw the horrors of Holocaust, Blitzkrieg and many other things. Okay, so there was a necessity fell for a behavioral revolution that emerged in 1950s. It remained dominant in United States of America even in the 1960s. Then after you have this Chicago School. So Chicago School is associated with a one personality called Charles Merriam, who actually is considered to be the pioneer of this school. Okay, and he is also known as the founder of the Chicago School, which made substantial contribution to the behavioral movement. And in the article, The Present State of the Study of Politics, published in the American Political Science Review, and in his book called The New Aspects of Politics, published in 1925, Merriam criticized contemporary political science for its lack of scientific rigor. And he actually criticized the work of historians as they had ignored the role of the psychological, sociological and economic factors in the human affairs. So, those things which you cannot quantify, which you cannot actually verify through data, and just if you are relying on the speculation, then it is something which Merriam actually, like, he has relegated as not the real truth or real knowledge. Okay. So, this is all about the Chicago School. Now, 8 features of behavioralism as enumerated by David Easton. So, I am sure that you have heard about David Easton, his political system approach, okay, that input, output and that feedback mechanism and all these things, okay. So, now here, David Easton, he came up with 8 points with reference to the explanation or the way he actually explained about behavioralism. Okay, so the very first one is the regularities. So it implies that there are certain discoverable uniformities that you need to find it through some that you need to find it out, or the pattern. Okay, so you have to find certain, like, you cannot just predict the political phenomenon, but you have to think in terms of the uniformities as well as the pattern. So there is a need for regularities. Okay, verification. It means that it requires that the validity of such theory, like statements, must be testable. Like those things which you are saying, it should be verified. It should be go through the process of the verification. Techniques. Okay, what sort of methods you are using it. Okay, it means the means for acquiring and interpreting data should be examined self-consciously, refined and validated for the purpose of observing, recording and analyzing behavior. Okay, you cannot just make a wishful thinking about, oh, this is the reason why it is happening. No, not like that. When I went for, when I chose a typical period for my PhD research, I was asked that you have to give us the reasons, the valid reasons why you have chosen this period to this period. Why? Okay, why not the other period you have taken? So like that. Okay, then after the quantification, the data, the introduction of mathematics. Okay. So it is necessary because precision in the recording of data and statement of findings requires measurement and should be expressed in terms of actual quantities, or to facilitate proper analysis, like in your sample, the sample size and everything. Like, okay, now you are going for a survey or something. So what is your what is your sample size, how many people you have interviewed, and many other things. Okay, so all these things are actually involved. Even if you remember the Elton Mayer's human relations theory in public administration, also he had for a very long period he led various methods he employed to understand the human relations, how the human relations or the human interactions affect the working of the institutions or the organization. That is bang wiring test and many other things were there. Okay, Hawthorne studies basically. Then after the values, the behavioralists actually drew a clear distinction between the ethical evaluation and empirical explanation. So it is highly value neutral. Value neutral and emphasis on facts. Okay, then after systematization, it stands for establishing a close relationship between the theory and research. Okay, close relationship between theory and research. Okay, so then after pure science, obviously, it holds that understanding and the explanation of political behavior is essential to utilize political knowledge in the solution of urgent practical problems of a society, like like you have to employ the scientific methods to understand the behavior of like particular, like let's say the voting behavior or some surveys. Let's take an uh, example of the Sydney Verba's work on that that how they created that three types of so three types of political behavior they have spoken about, like the subject, participant and the parochial one. Okay. Then after we have this integration. It signifies integration of political science with other social sciences in order to evolve a comprehensive view of human affairs. It means that you cannot actually say that the political domain, the political science domain is independent from others, but rather than that you have to integrate with other disciplines as well. So it will actually help each other. Okay. So like the bringing of cybernetics and many other things are part of it. Okay. So the important books or the of these those empiricists or the those who prescribe to the empirical tradition in political science or political theory, we can say one is the George Catlin, and he has come up with this work called the, or he is also called as the G.E.G. Catlin. Okay. And the Science and Method of Politics 1927, Harold D. Laswell, Harold D. Laswell, Politics, Who Gets What, When, How, 1936, it was published in 1936. David Easton, The Political System, 1953. Robert Dahl, Who Governs Democracy and Power in an American City, 1961. So these are the important works associated with the behavioral tradition. Then after we have another like now we have come to our third segment, and that is the post behavioralism. Okay. Now here the post behavioralism. So this is also associated with David Easton. So he actually came up with this idea, or he actually declared about the post behavioralism. Okay, the what we say, we have heralded to a period of post behavioralism. So here dissatisfaction with the behavioralism that emerged in the dissatisfaction with the behavioralism that emerged in the 1950s period. Okay, in the 1950s, and it actually, like, post behavioralism emerged in the 1970s basically. Okay, so emergence of post behavioralism in 1970s precisely. So there was an inclination towards the normative questions, and then after this was reflected in the writings of theorists such as John Rawls and Robert Nozick. Okay. So as we know that Robert Nozick and John Rawls, they have invested much on moral philosophy. Okay. So like John Rawls' works such as A Theory of Justice, published in 1971, Justice as Fairness, published in 1985, Political Liberalism, published in 1993, and The Law of Peoples in 1993. So I'm just writing the names of the books by John Rawls. Okay. Okay. Then after we have another thinker called Robert Nozick. His famous entitlement theory, which came as a criticism of John Rawls' distributive justice. His book's name, Anarchy, State and Utopia, published in 1974. The famous entitlement theory. So now, so the relevance and action were the twin slogans of the post-behavioral period. There was a revival of interest in the concepts like justice, equality, liberty, community, etc. Then emphasized on the need for values plus facts. Okay, this is more important. So you need value judgments for social policy. At the same time, you need scientific methods for understanding, or we can say exploring the facts. Okay, so you can actually, you need both values plus facts. So this is the mantra of post-behavioralism. Okay. So now, so students now, and there is another thinker also, that is there, Michael Oakeshott. He actually came up with this philosophical questions are interconnected and that answering them requires wide-ranging critical reflection. So this was an idea by Michael Oakeshott, and his book's name is On Human Conduct, published in 1975. These all works actually made a kind of a revival of this normative. We can say that somewhere they actually brought a kind of a revival of the normative tradition. At the same time, we can say that they were also inclined towards the post-behavioral tradition as well, where you are not just ridiculing like fact or values, but rather you want to keep both of them so that you can actually reach up for a real method or for exploring the political phenomena or to discover new political phenomenon. Okay. Now we will just take up one UGC NET question, okay, which is related to the unit number 1. Question is, which of the following factors are responsible for the decline of political theory? Historicism, positivism, moral relativism, hyperfactualism. Actually, these 4 factors are actually responsible. So, the like 4 of them are actually responsible for the decline of political theory. And there is another thinker called Peter Laslett, who also declared that political philosophy is dead. He long back he made that idea, okay, because of the rise of behavioralism. And you can read more about this from like various books on political theory, and you can read 𝐃𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐡𝐭𝐢, David Held, as well as the books by Andrew Heywood as well. So these are the preliminary readings for political theory, but in the next class I will be starting with the concepts. Okay, so students, stay tuned. Thank you for watching my video. See you in another lecture. Bye.